Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We are starting a press conference on reports of alleged attacks on healthcare in northwest Syria, and we are having Russian permanent representative Vassily Nebenzia as a speaker. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you very much for coming, and good afternoon again. Thank you for sacrificing your lunch for me. I appreciate it. I call this press conference preceded by my briefing to speak on numerous allegations on bombings of medical and other civilian facilities in Idlib. We've heard these allegations both in the media and in the Security Council. Some of our colleagues from other delegations even organized open meetings on this topic. I would like to focus today on what would be of specific interest to you as a media community. I have no doubts that at some point in the future, the dramatic Syrian conflict would be studied and analyzed, since it is in a sense revolutionary in terms of the variety of warfare methods applied. Где у нас будет? Где у нас будет? Тарас здесь?
Да, конечно.
Хорошо. It revealed a whole new dimension of warfare when modernly equipped, trained, and well-supplied non-state armed groups act as an effective party to armed conflict, but often manage to hide behind and invoke international humanitarian law. Secondly, the deliberate manipulation of information has become one of the most important weapons of this war, especially at this current stage when terrorists are on the brink of defeat. I hear the Russian translation all the time. Unplug it, yeah, thank you. Besides the battle for territory, it's of course the battle for minds. I still hear it. Tons of articles have been issued about Syria, hours and hours of broadcasts have been released. We have piles of material to work with here, obviously, but it doesn't take too much of analysis skills to see a clear trend. Every time the government gets close to retaking control of a major region, it immediately faces massive amount of disinformation thrown into public space. And as a tradition, the bulk of it comes from the so-called reliable but unidentified sources. Well, the sources may be unclear, but their purposes are crystal clear: to slow down a military offensive and discredit the military rivals. Few modern-day weaponries are capable to be as effective as that one. As many rightfully stressed, the province of Idlib represents one of the last major strongholds of terrorist groups in Syria. And since for the last 5 years it served as a retreat place for shady elements from all over Syria, we now end up with having true melting pot here. It combines all sorts of groups and actors, among them jihadists and terrorists listed by the Security Council, 50 shades of grey indeed. Nobody denies that there are also civilians in Idlib and that they live in dire conditions, some of them going through second or even third round of relocation. However, there is no other way to resolve their suffering but to liberate this area from jihadists who simply hold those civilians as a shield to protect their own positions. It's important to note that there is no UN presence in Idlib, which means that the information about what's happening in Idlib comes from the so-called trustworthy sources within Idlib that are traditionally not revealed due to security reasons. We've witnessed similar situation in Aleppo and Eastern Ghouta. Do you remember, for example, an outcry about medical supplies in Aleppo? When the city was liberated, the Syrian authorities discovered tons of medicines and equipment in terrorist warehouses. We'll show you something similar today, actually too. Well, we never trust unidentified sources, and when we use our own means to trace these sources of information, the result is always the same. The claims came from the people who are connected to listed terrorist groups, like notorious white helmets, for example. Today I would like to demonstrate to you a few examples from a large batch of data that we gathered in Idlib in response to those allegations. As they were made in public, we will respond the same way. First, the so-called deconfliction system or more correctly, deconfliction arrangements, since it is a totally informal setting. It exists between the UN and parties in Syria, whereby the UN provides the location of objects that are reported to be civilian in order to make sure that they are protected in the course of military activities. We started this practice back in 2014, and it proved to serve well when the reports came directly from the area where the UN staff or its partner organizations were present and operating. Back then, the mechanism was really useful. Now let's move to 2019. Idlib, northern Syria. Like I said, the UN is not present on the ground there. It's a fact that it has been reconfirmed by our UN friends for many times, so the bulk of information they report comes directly from informants that I referred to before. This may also explain the discrepancies in numbers reported by the UN. We constantly find them in publications, specifically on figures regarding IDPs and informal settings in Idlib. We flagged it to our UN colleagues and hope they will do their homework. For example, in one publication, they spoke about 400,000 people, IDPs in Idlib, in another one, 700,000, which is a big discrepancy. Now, back to deconfliction. Under the arrangement, they report to the United Nations that under coordinates X and Y, they have a 100% civilian facility and ask the UN to make sure it's not hit by warring sites. The UN, in turn, shares this information with the parties, acting as a mailbox between the sites. So when we hear that this or that object was deconflicted, that's done under such a procedure. Now, you're a fighter on the battlefield. Suppose the fighter jets are coming. You have a choice to hide in the nearest empty building or go into the one which you reported as deconflicted, hoping that it wouldn't be hit, since the UN shared its coordinates. What would you do? I leave this answer open. Also, would you try to use this arrangement for your military advantage? Why not? The only thing which can stop you is the respect for Geneva Conventions, which directly forbid to use civilian infrastructure to shield military objects, since that would compromise protected status, additional Protocol 1, Article 12. But would you expect al-Nusra to respect the IHL? I wouldn't. I'll give you a couple of examples how this deconfliction arrangement is used in real life. The deconfliction list reported by the UN contains hundreds of facilities claimed to be civilian. It's pretty challenging to verify it in its entirety, but our military managed to do at least part of the homework and closely examine some objects submitted to us under the arrangement. That was done as part of the reconnaissance activities, which are regularly undertaken by our military personnel in line with the relevant obligations under the same international humanitarian law. And that was stressed specifically every time. So what did we find? Lots of instances of deliberate disinformation. First, the coordinates in the list that we received failed to match factual location of the reported deconfliction facilities. Some examples. Slide 3. Item 91 in the list, Kafr Zeta Public Health Facility. It's a well-known structure which was there long before the war, and its coordinates are available even in Google Maps. But in the list we were provided with, next slide, the coordinates were changed to a different location, which rests 4 kilometers away to the northwest. And it's not Kafr Zeta Public Health Facility. It's an underground facility with a water supply and close to a farm. This is it. The coordinates are on the screen. Another showcase example, the Central Hospital of Marat al-Numan, listed under item 156 in the deconfliction list. It's now on the screen together with the factual coordinates. Again, it's one of the oldest establishments in the city, and the location of it is well known. But the coordinates provided to the UN were false. Again, what we received instead is a building located 10 kilometers away to the southeast. It's even in a different city. According to the data we have, it was a local police outpost before the area was occupied. Do I need to tell you what happens with the police station and specifically the weaponry inside when the area is taken over by jihadists? I'm sure you can figure that out, just as the reasons being reported it as a hospital. I give you only two examples due to time constraints, but to get you a sense of an iceberg size here, I'll just say that only in July alone, we were provided with 12 false coordinates. And that's only about what we had capacity and time to check. We often hear that locations reported to us may represent a temporary medical facility, and discrepancy in the coordinates is not a big issue. Well, I won't dwell on the distinctive features of the hospitals that the hospitals should carry in accordance with the First Geneva Convention, Article 38, and Fourth Geneva Convention, Article 18, though it's also important to remember that apparently this building and the other one, this one, do not answer the requirements set forth in the conventions, just as this installation. The point I'll make instead is that no one can verify what is actually located at these coordinates, but still they are reported as deconflicted sites. But what do many of those facilities really represent? I would refer to the towns of Al-Habeit and Kafr Zeita. Both have been recently liberated from the Nusra Front and their associates, and both were early included into deconfliction lists submitted to us. I covered Kafr Zeita today already. Remember that cave bunker? Now I will give you an opportunity to see what was inside the facility. But first, Habeit. The town was taken over by jihadists in 1214. The building reported to us as a hospital was located on a front line and was used as one of the stationary points for heavy firearms. Remarkably, the family which lived there left with terrorists back in 2014. By all means and criteria, it's a 100% military target. There were no traces of medical activities found. And now back to Kafr Zeita. It was apparently a medical unit well hidden beneath the ground, with all the premises scattered around artificial caves excavated by jihadists. All of them were intact and lacked any trace of damage. May I remind you that this was one of the facilities which was reported to us as air raided by the Office of the UN Special Envoy back in July, as well as by partners in the World Health Organization under their so-called surveillance system for attacks on healthcare. The case of Kafr Zeita perfectly described the concerns that we expressed over this surveillance system. These facilities are now accessible for the journalists working in Syria. Everyone who wants to have a sense what a classic disinformation campaign of the 21st century looks like can examine this case more closely. Also, colleagues, remember I mentioned the well-supplied storage that Syrian forces discovered in Aleppo. Well, apparently we are dealing with the same story in Idlib. Next slide, please. This is the inside of that medical facility with the medicines and instruments there. And that brings me to my final point. The example of Kafr Zeita is not an isolated case. Apparently, in July this year, our UN colleagues submitted us the list of 11 locations tagged as reported and confirmed damaged, as they said, with aerial attacks. Our military took an effort and went through all of them. We will now demonstrate our findings before you ask questions. The slides will be self-explanatory. Before we demonstrate them, I would like to once again reiterate that the Russian military takes all the necessary precautions before every operation it's planning. The slides we are going to show to you next demonstrate that aerial surveillance remains the critical part of this planning. That is how we get all the images from different time periods, which we now manage to compare. Slide 17, primary hospital in Marat and Numan. Next slide, Hospital Kelavi, Jisr al-Shugur. Slide 19, Hospital Kafr Nebel was reported damaged by the white helmets. slide 12, the underground facility in Kafr Zeita. Even with the double dual meaning of this facility, it was not bombed neither by us nor by the Syrians. At these slides, you can see that facilities, photos of which were taken before, stay intact with the recent photos, which were taken already after the alleged bombings of those. I would now turn to your questions if you have any. But before that, I would like to raise one more issue and also leave it open. Why don't we see such a devotion on the part of our colleagues from the international organizations, media, and the humanitarian advocates when it comes how the coalition operates in northeast Syria? We all remember Al-Raqqa, we remember Mosul in Iraq. Are these inquiries requested or submitted? Are these events being promoted? That also applies to the Al-Hol camp that goes under the spotlight. Does it go into the spotlight as often as Rukban camp in the south? By the way, we have received troubling information from Rukban. Apparently, terrorists who control the camp massively blocked the civilians from fleeing it, and later on opened fire at the distribution of humanitarian aid. I hope it will be duly reported and highlighted in the next UN reports. So my briefing is over. I'm ready to answer your questions.
Thank you, Ambassador. First question, the Chief of ANCA, Valeria, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador, for this press conference on behalf of ANCA. My question is, what do you expect from the UN Board of Inquiry on Syria? And if I may, I have another question on the goals plan that you presented, that Russia presented some time ago. In light of the new developments in the Gulf, is the plan still on the table, and it will be somehow debated during the UN General Assembly next week? Thank you.
First question. We believe that the aim of the Commission of Inquiry that was established by the Secretary General is exactly to find out how UN is operating in Syria and what are the deficiencies and how that can be improved. And I think that our today's briefing would provide a lot to contemplate on for that commission. If we are being asked about it, we'll of course pass these materials to the commission to study and analyze. On the initiative on regional security architecture in the Gulf, yes, it's more than in life and more than, and of course on the table. Today we discussed Yemen, and we again, like Senator Caton, the elder or the junior, I forgot, was saying about Carthago. We repeated that we still have resolution 598 of the Security Council on the table, a resolution that entrusted the Secretary General with the need to think about the security architecture in the Gulf, and that our draft concept of regional security architecture that we presented recently is on the table. And yes, we hope that it will be discussed by the interested parties with interest, and I'm sure that it will be mentioned and deliberated during the forthcoming session of the General Assembly.
James.
Ambassador James Bays from Al Jazeera. You make it quite clear that the UN doesn't really know what's going on because it doesn't have the staff on the ground, and that your military are doing the reconnaissance and have a very clear picture of what's going on the ground. So can I ask you a couple of questions about the situation on the ground? In Russia's estimation, what is the population right now living in Idlib, and how many fighters are there, and how many of those fighters would you say are jihadist fighters? And given that you're being briefed by your military and you're carrying out with the Syrian government what you say is a plan to liberate the area. What are they telling you about how long this will take for you to complete that mission?
They're telling us who?
Telling you, your military, what are they telling you about how long your mission to liberate? What is the timeline for the completion of that operation? And if I may ask you about today's meeting of the Security Council on Yemen, but also the added bit about Saudi Arabia. President Trump says his military is locked and loaded. He seems to be contemplating some military action. What would be the reaction of Moscow if there was some sort of strike on either Iran or the Houthis?
Thank you, James. Difficult to answer the question exactly because of the reasons I was alluding to when I presented at this briefing on the exact number, both of the population of Idlib, on the number of IDPs, of the number of rebels, including the terrorist groups. Clearly terrorist groups. It's difficult because indeed we don't have a reliable statistic on it. But figures that mostly circulate speak about around 3 million people within the Idlib province, and we operate based on that premise. We don't have any other figures that we are not challenging that. I mean, we don't have we cannot confirm it, but we proceed on that premise. On fighters, including terrorist fighters, there are also discrepancies in numbers. 50,000 at a certain point. Some say 25,000 in Khairat Tahrir al-Sham. But what is maybe even more important that a large bulk of those fighters in Idlib, large bulk of it is constituted by the foreign terrorist fighters, and that represents a major problem, because if with the Syrians it's easier, they are on their own homeland, even if they were from another province, that they can go back through the mechanisms that proved to be working before in similar situations. But what to do with the foreign terrorist fighters? That's a big issue, and that's what makes this situation even more complicated. They have nowhere to go, so they may stay to the end. Now, how long the operation will take place? I hope you don't take our military for idiots. They will not share this information even with me at any cost. Now we have a ceasefire in Idlib, violated by jihadists. They every time there is a ceasefire violation, it has been initiated by the rebels. And as I told you at the press conference on the beginning of our presidency, ironically, it was also violated by the U.S. on the first day of the ceasefire, on the 31st of August, when they air raided two places, Marat Misrin and Kafr Khaya, where, by the way, civilian casualties were also reported. On the situation in the Gulf and the recent attacks, they were unanimously and unequivocally condemned by all Security Council members, us included. It is inadmissible that civil objects and socio-economic infrastructure are being targeted. What we said that we should not hurry with the conclusions, because there are conflicting reports who did it. Ansar Allah took the responsibility. The United States is saying that they know for sure it was Iran. We don't have a clear picture, but the response was unequivocal by the Security Council. On lock and loaded, of course, we locked and loaded. We are very concerned that incidents similar to this may provoke larger conflict in the Gulf. Gulf has enough problems. Gulf and the surrounding area of the Middle East has enough problems besides this, and the major conflict in the Gulf would be definitely a disaster. We would want to avoid it at any cost, and calling on all our partners to demonstrate restraint.
Thank you, Ambassador. Betül Yörük from the Turkish news agency Anadolu. President Putin was in Turkey today to discuss the situation in Idlib with his Turkish and Iranian counterparts, and he said the three nations, Russia, Turkey, and Iran, need to make additional steps to eliminate terrorism. Can you tell us what these steps would be on the Russian side?
I would like to correct you. President Putin was not in Turkey today. He is in Turkey today. I think that they started trilateral meeting not so long ago, because before that I had reports that they were in bilaterals. And of course, one of the major things that they will be discussing is the implementation of the Sochi memorandum on the Idlib de-escalation zone, and how to effectively implement it. We know that there were issues with it, and we really hope that the meeting, the summit in Turkey will provide us with a breakthrough on it. Each side has to go its part of the road. We all committed in Sochi, and I hope we'll recommit in Turkey today on the need to deconflict Idlib while getting rid of terrorists who really hijacked the province. I will not preempt the results. We are eagerly waiting to hear from Turkey on the conclusion of these negotiations, and hope that they will contribute to the peaceful solution, not just in Idlib but in the whole Syria.
Nabil.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Nabil Abisab, Al Arabi TV. So, of course, you have a long list of targets or sites in Idlib that included in these coordinated information with the UN, right? So do you mean now that Russia does not trust the accuracy of this list in general? How are you going to deal with the rest of the sites in Idlib in the near future? Obviously, operations are continuing. The military operations are still happening on the ground. And do you believe that the agreement with Turkey should be your maybe way to for Turkey to use its influence in Idlib, maybe to have a better information about what's happening on the ground?
Military operation in Idlib is not developing right now. It is halted due to ceasefire. If there are sporadic military activities, that is, as I said, in response to terrorists not obliging and not observing the ceasefire. Each party that adopted the Sochi memorandum, which, by the way, and that is one of our major disagreements with some of our partners, included one important paragraph that besides deconfliction in Idlib, we are having those terrorist groups there which are not exempt from being fought despite deconfliction, unless they surrender, and then this is another arrangement. So I think that each party in Idlib, the Russian military who are assisting the Turkish side to observe the ceasefire, through supporting them through those 12, I think, posts that were established in the Idlib zone. Turkey itself, who has influence on these groups, should go. It's part of this its way to make the solution closer. I don't know what specific steps will be proposed or taken in Turkey today, but we really we place a lot of hope on the results of today's summit to see the progress because Idlib, of course, is, as I said, home to a large number of civilians, and it's in no one's interest that these civilians are being in constant danger as they used to be before all this time.
Okay, maybe a last couple of questions. Edie, please.
Thank you. Myself.
Thank you very.
No, Edie.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. Two questions. First, Mr. Peterson said that he was hoping for an announcement before world leaders arrive on a constitutional committee for Syria. Do you have any update on those negotiations? They've been very close for a while, and is there the possibility of an announcement this week? And secondly, I wonder if you could tell us what's happening with negotiations on the vote this afternoon on the Afghanistan resolution. We all know that there is a disagreement between China wanting a reference to the Belt and Road Initiative and the U.S. objecting, saying that it's not related to the mandate for the Afghan political mission. What's happening and what's Russia's position? Thank you.
On the Constitutional Committee, I wish it was announced yesterday, but it was not, and I will not dare predict exact date of that announcement. Although, like all of us, I would like to see it sooner than later. I can give you a heads up in a way that is partly an answer to a question that on the request of Geir Pedersen, we moved consultations on political Syria from the 19th of September to the 30th. And a lot of shuttle diplomacy is happening as we speak around that issue. And hopefully, we can resolve a few last minor obstacles before the end of the month. Of course, I would be happy to participate as a presidency of the Security Council in that kind of an announcement, but I would better not. I would keep my fingers crossed so that it happens. That it happens before the end of the month. If that happens during the high-level week, the better. The better. On the resolution on the extension of the mandate of the mission of UNAMA, of the mission in Afghanistan, indeed there were some differences between some delegations in that resolution. What I'm absolutely convinced that we have to extend the mandate of the mission. Today is the last day. In fact, tomorrow is the last day. And so this is our deadline. We will go into a meeting on that issue in the afternoon. What will come out of the meeting, we will see after 3 o'clock. And so you will be the first to hear it when we go finally to a briefing in the Security Council. Yes.
We have a line of gentlemen who want to ask the last question. So
Thank you so much.
I'm ready to answer more.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Let's go.
Abdul Hamid Sayama from the Arabic Daily, Al-Quds Al-Arabi. Mr. Ambassador, the former Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, the current Secretary General Guterres, Kofi Annan, Lakhdar Brahimi, and de Mistura, they all said there is no military solution to the Syrian crisis. Are you proving them all wrong, on one hand? And the second, do you see, can Russia go an extra mile to give peace a chance to solve the issue in Idlib peacefully, saving the civilians, the carnage that could happen for 3 million people there? Thank you.
We also, like the former and the current Secretary Generals, are saying that there is no military solution in Syria, and we are not as naive as to believe that the military victory over terrorists, which was a necessary thing, would be suffice to end the conflict altogether. That's why we are having the political track. That's why we are trying to establish the constitutional committee that would go into discussing what the Syrian future will be, how it will be organized and arranged. As you know, Syrian-led, Syrian-owned political process. Nobody can impose on Syrians how they will build their country after this bloody and awful conflict is over. So I confirm there is no military solution. Extra mile, yes, we are ready to go that extra mile, and in no way we have any plans, nor the Syrians, as this is their population, to jeopardize the civilians in Idlib. We fully understand how sensitive the issue is, but if you mean by extra mile engaging in talks with terrorists, I think that is absolutely a non-issue. We started to notice recently that some of our partners, for example, the United States, started to say that Hayat Tahrir al-Sham is not that terrorist anymore. You know, they emancipated, they became more civilized, they organize a civil administration in Idlib, they are running daily lives, etc. Of course, they are trying to change their colors, but that does not change the terrorist essence of that organization. We are not negotiating with the terrorists, but we will be doing anything to alleviate the suffering of the civilian population and to solve the problem of Idlib by as non-intrusive means as possible.
Thank you, Ambassador Yassin Jawar al-Madar, no Syrian. My question is, it's in Idlib, they have 4 million people, not 3 million people. That's first of all. Second of all, those people, how can I protect from? They need food, they need medicals. Is everything blocked? And also, we talk only about Idlib. How about Hama? Still in Hama, they have some terrorists, right? Can you tell us what's going on over there, please, about Hama too? Thank you so much.
Thank you for the new statistics. I don't know whether I can operate it, but I will definitely take that into account. Yes, indeed, the problem with the daily life of people in Idlib is a serious one. They need to get supplies. Part of the supplies comes across the Turkish border through the so-called cross-border trans-border assistance. We sometimes question the effectiveness of that mechanism because it is being done outside any knowledge of the Syrian authorities or whoever how this assistance is being distributed. It is operated by the UN from Turkey and by UN partner organizations. But indeed, the problem is serious, and the best way the best way to solve it is to say goodbye to terrorists in Idlib, because they are the major obstacle to these people living a normal life. On Hama, I cannot provide you with detailed information. I'm not a military headquarters officer. I don't know the exact situation on the ground, but I can do it privately later when I specifically ask this information to answer your question.
Okay, Ali. Yeah.
Thank you, Ambassador. Ali Barada from Sharq Al-Awsat newspaper and France 24. To what extent Russia is going to cooperate with the Board of Inquiry established by the Secretary General on the attacks in Idlib? And on the other hand, another question, you are the President of the Security Council for this month, and we heard voices today that the Security Council should take a unified action regarding the attacks on the oil facilities in Saudi Arabia, and the scale of those attacks and the accuracy indicates that a state actor is behind that. Do you agree or not? Thank you.
On the last question, I do not know. That's why I will not present you with what I think about it. We said today, as I said, that we should not call names before any inquiry is made, and then we can judge who that was and which actor was behind. You know who claimed, and you know what has been said. I said it initially in one of my first questions that I answered. On Board of Inquiry, as I told, we see it primarily as an internal UN mechanism that should investigate how effective the UN mechanism work on deconflicting arrangement with their partners in Syria, how reliable information that it receives is. As you said today, we not simply expressed our doubts. We provided you with facts that prove that at least some of this information, part of this information, to what extent I cannot tell you, but is false, and it calls for meetings of the Security Council. It calls for accusations. It leads to discussing accusing Russia and Syrian army in indiscriminate bombings. So these are big questions for us as well, and we tried to not even to see the grain of doubt, but to show you on the screen that this information on which these allegations are based is false. To what extent? Let this board inquiry inquire and find out. If that information that we provided to you is useful to them, and I think it is, they should definitely use it as a basis for some of its deliberation. We have not been approached by anybody yet. When we are, if we are, we will first see what kind of terms of reference they're having, how they are going to approach it, and we'll proceed from there. Michelle? She had a birthday recently. She deserves it.
Yeah. This is really the last.
I just wanted to ask a broad question. Obviously, next week we have the UN General Assembly. All the world leaders are going to be here. What is Russia expecting out of this UN General Assembly? What do you think are going to be the hot topics? And given that your president did meet with President Rouhani today, does Russia think that Rouhani should consider meeting with Trump on the sidelines next week?
I can only be sure that President Putin met President Rouhani today. Whether President Rouhani will meet President Trump here in New York, I cannot speculate. We hear different and various views on it. In our view, any any direct contact between parties is good, but you know that both sides are conditioning this contact on non-reconciliating conditions. And what will come out of it, let's see. Maybe that will be the greatest sensation of the forthcoming high-level week. I don't know. Let's see. Now, coming to the General Assembly as such, let's separate the high-level week from the rest of the General Assembly, which will last till approximately same day next year. The high-level week will host lots of high-level events, starting with the climate change summit, with the statements which will be very, very closely followed by the international community from the world leaders. We will have, as I told you, 2 important Security Council meetings during this high-level week. Hopefully, we are spared of any other emergency meetings of the Security Council, and we can devote ourselves completely to the General Assembly. If you're asking about Russian priorities, they are in principle similar to those that we promoted during last years. We will be trying to work for the unifying agenda. We will be trying to work for multilateralism in this pluralistic world. We had a meeting on multilateralism, quite an interesting one recently, organized by the outgoing President of the General Assembly, with the participation of the Secretary General and myself and the President of ECOSOC. The fate of multilateralism is always an issue which should be discussed in a place which is the home of multilateralism, which is the United Nations. Our own initiatives, they relate to issues in disarmament, like non-deployment of force in the outer space. We will be promoting our initiative on cybersecurity. By the way, we had a good meeting of the open-ended working group on international information security last week. That witnessed a very active participation, not only by the promoters of the initiative, but of those countries that initially opposed it. We finally agreed that these 2 mechanisms that exist, both the open-ended working group by the whole membership and the group of experts on the issue, can and should be supplementary, as we initially were saying. So we are somewhat optimistic about how we will deal with the issue during this session of the General Assembly. We will have our traditional initiatives. A lot of things are happening around the rewriting of history. History is such a thing that even the immediate past is an issue for a debate, let alone the not so distant, but the past of the last century. So we will be, of course, promoting initiatives that would confirm the understanding of history as it was sealed and codified when we were creating the United Nations, and of course the whole year will be under the celebration of the 75th anniversary, which will give us a good opportunity to assess what we have achieved, what we have not achieved. I was devoting my time to studying as much as I can the history of the creation of the United Nations, and that provides you with a very interesting background, how the founding fathers were approaching the idea, how they were negotiating in various places, Yalta, Potsdam, Dumbarton Oaks, of course, and San Francisco, and how the United Nations came into being. And sometimes it's a very touchy story, I would say, and we should learn and know about it more. By the way, during the high-level week, we will have an event dedicated to the 110th anniversary of our former Soviet foreign minister Andrei Gromyko, who was one of the founding fathers of the United Nations. He was negotiating the charter here in San Francisco. I invite you, using the opportunity, the occasion, to visit the exhibition and the opening, which will be opened by Lavrov and the Belarusian Foreign Minister Makeyev. Thank you very much for coming. I really appreciate your time.